Welcome to the Futurist Society podcast, where we delve into the latest advancements in technology, science, and culture. From discussions on the latest breakthroughs in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration, the Futurist Society is your window into all of the awesomeness that the future holds. Get ready to be informed and inspired as we consider the positive impact of emerging technologies on humanity. Without further ado, welcome your host, Dr. Awesome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Future Society, where we are talking in the present, but talking about the future. We have today with us Laura Towart, who is the CEO and founder of Vivint Therapeutics, who's doing a lot of interesting stuff in the cancer and genetic space. I do want to talk with you a little bit about both of those topics, but tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this, and what you're doing right now.
Sure. Well, hi. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm originally from New York. I'm a scientist by training. I was doing my PhD at Cornell Sloan Kettering now many years ago. And I left my studies to actually found my first company, which is called Cellmatics. Started off as a fertility genomics company and now has evolved into kind of an early stage therapeutics company for women's health. Over the years, I've left New York City, lived in different places around the world. Became a little bit separated from Cellmatics because of the distance and my travels. Got introduced to this technology that underlies Vivint Therapeutics by the head of commercialization at Mount Sinai Medical Center. And when I heard about the technology, my main passion is personalized medicine. And genomics is my specialty. And so when I heard about this technology, got really excited about the opportunity to personalize cancer treatment and also all genetic disease. So started working with Mount Sinai. Now it's been about over a decade, I'd say. And then I launched Vivint Therapeutics here in London in 2018.
I feel like that's a really interesting thing that people are talking about, which is personalized medicine. But it hasn't really trickled down to any therapeutics that I can name. Is that inaccurate? Or are there any therapeutics that are currently out there on the market that people might have some experience with that have been shown to be effective?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of, for breast cancer, you have the HER2 family. You've got some personalization happening. I'd say there's a lot more, there's a lot further we can go. Just having recently dealt with a family member with cancer, I was really surprised by kind of the lack of personalization despite the progress that we've made.
Yeah. I know cancer is such a terrible disease. Actually, both my parents passed from cancer. So I'm personally understanding of people that are going through that struggle, and it's not a very good outcome if you have certain types of cancer also.
That's true.
And
my mother recently passed of cancer, and it's been very difficult being on both sides as working in the space for so long and then seeing the realities in the clinic. And
so what cancer did your mom have?
Colorectal cancer, which is the cancer that we focus on actually at Vivint. Okay.
So tell me how Vivint Therapeutics would affect colorectal cancer.
Sure. So basically what we licensed the technology from in partnership with Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai owns a portion of the company. And Mount Sinai really pioneered this. And so when I became involved, the technology was already fully developed and was successful in clinical trials. So I kind of came in very late. So the way that the technology works is a patient would go to their oncologist anywhere in the world. Their tumor would be biopsied as standard. A blood sample would be taken, and then we coordinate whole exome sequencing of the patient's tumor and blood. And we have a proprietary kind of variant calling software, which basically just reads through the exome and identifies the mutations that are really causing that person's cancer. And what makes us unique is that we look at not just the main drivers, but also passenger mutations and things that might help the cancer evade therapeutics. So help form resistance. And so we engineer all of these mutations into fruit flies. So we create a fruit fly avatar. And we do this in a tissue specific way. So if the patient has colorectal cancer, we engineer the tumor to develop in the lowermost portion of the gut of the fly. And then we create what we call the avatar army. So we expand that fly population to any number, usually 500,000 for each patient. And then we use that army to screen all approved drugs. So we screen everything ever approved by the FDA, which is about 2,000 drugs, alone and in combination, until we find the right combination to rescue the fly, because the fly is going to have a lethal tumor and it'll die in a controlled period of time unless it's rescued. And so we identify these never seen before cocktails, and it's usually combinations of cancer and non-cancer drugs, which makes it really exciting. And it's also usually it's small molecules, so it's usually very targeted, cheaper, and also less toxic. So we're getting these really cool combinations, which we then also patent, and we're looking to further develop.
Okay. So does this remove the need for surgery, or is that
No.
surgery?
No, I think surgery is like a big part of it as well. But I think usually it's a combination of surgery and chemotherapy, and this would kind of replace the chemotherapy, just make it includes chemotherapy usually, but it makes it much more personalized.
That's interesting. And you were saying that there's applications outside of just cancer, correct?
Yeah, so we currently, and Mount Sinai has shown two things. So they've done a lot of work in modeling rare genetic diseases for therapeutics discovery. So diseases where there isn't a standard of care or a therapy, actually. So we're currently modeling ECHS1, which is a rare genetic disease. We've created a working model, and we're currently working towards therapeutics discovery. We could also do something kind of cool. We could model diabetes and cancer in the same animal. So we can model comorbidities. And Mount Sinai has published that patients that have diabetes and cancer should get completely different treatments than patients with just cancer alone. And that's something that we're going to be working to explore clinically.
So could this work with like craniofacial syndromes? Like, like let's say someone is born with some sort of genetic disease. That's my background is craniofacial disorders. And so, let's say cherubism, which is the disease that these young individuals will like grow tumors in their face that will make them have further complications later on in their life. Can you model that disease and then find existing drugs that target that?
So I'm not sure. So if it has anything to do with bone formation, we could model it well. So it has to have a homologue in the fly.
Gotcha.
So ECHS1 is a metabolic disease, and so there is a homologue, and that's why we're able to model it. Also, the way that we screen the drugs, there has to be kind of a pretty strong phenotype so that we can see a reversal of that. So like usually with cancer, we use lethality as the screen. And so very simple, either the fly is dead or it's alive. With something like that, it's a bit more nuanced. So we'd have to be able to see. But we've invented this new kind of image capture and analysis software. So right now we're just saying, is the fly dead or is it alive in some kind of crude way? And it's more refined than that. But what we're able to do now is to be able to measure over time and say, okay, the quality of the eye of the fly is a measure of health. So we can now, as we're developing the technology further, look to see, okay, we're not just looking at survival, we're looking at metrics of health. And that's when we can start getting into really cool things like looking at longevity and quality of life.
So taking a step back for a second, is the fruit fly the only, because when many of the people who are listening were young and in their college years and they're doing genetic experiments, the fruit fly was kind of like the even college students are using fruit flies, right? Is that the only thing available, or are there other similar animal models that people are using that are more analogous to humans?
Sure. So the fruit fly, so I'd say in terms of models, there's always advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages of the fruit fly is that we're able to engineer any number of genetic alterations quickly and cheaply. And like, for example, in a mouse model, you can maybe engineer 3 to 4 mutations, and it will take a long time, and then you won't have a large number of animals to screen. So you could usually say, okay, there's 3 standard of care therapies. Which one is best? And the mouse might be good for that, but you're not modeling the full complexity. So the basic premise of underlying kind of the development of our technology is that cancer is complex. There's so many mutations driving a cancer. All of the promise of targeted therapy, where we identify a single mutation and drug it with one drug, it failed. There was a great promise for that. And in fact, its studies have shown it makes no difference to target one, because it's like HIV, where you have multiple leading heads. And if you're just going to hit it with one therapy, it's going to mutate and evolve around it very quickly. And that's why we have patients, they have an immediate response and then they have an immediate remission. And so we know now that you need to have this kind of combination front. But in order to do that, you have to have complex models. So to be able to really understand how that's working. So I'd say ours is very good in that it's complex. Like, we're able to get complex tumors, and then we can screen so many combinations that you can't do in any other system. So it's a great kind of first step in identifying things that you wouldn't even think about it. We don't presume to understand and say, I want to test this or this. We ask the oncologist. If the oncologist wants to test a certain thing or a certain combination, we'll test it, but we'll show them how what they would choose ranks against what kind of the kitchen sink approach would show. And so we're able to uncover these really cool things that you wouldn't find any other way. Organoids are a big kind of deal now, and everyone's talking about them. And I think in terms of relevance, I'd say there's a few problems with organoids, and like that one, it's difficult. Not every patient's tissue will culture well in order to
organoids are artificial organs created from a patient. Is that?
Yes. It could be from a patient. You could buy commercial ones, but the idea is that you're testing sometimes the tissue from an actual patient. And even though cancer proliferates very well in a body, it doesn't necessarily proliferate well in culture. And then it becomes a little artificial, because when you have a whole animal system, like the tumor is communicating with other organs, it's communicating with immune cells, with the microbiome. It's much bigger than the way that we simplify it in culture. So I think there are advantages of, and I'd say organoids are getting better, but I'd say at this point in time, I don't think it's better than let's say our technology. I think it's complementary.
Okay. And has your technology objectively been shown to increase survival rates or have a better effect than existing models or existing therapies?
So we don't have a large enough data set to be comparative, but we have published case studies where we've shown patients that have failed every other therapy, that had no other option, had dramatic response.
Oh, that's cool. And these patients were they all colorectal cancer, or were they all sorts of other cancers?
So a few of the patients were colorectal, one published, and then another patient was adenocarcinoma.
And the therapy itself, I could see it being used in metabolic diseases. I could see it being used in other sort of genetic diseases. But one of the things that I think you highlighted a little bit is other further applications. Tell me a little bit about what your goal is for outside of cancer, other than metabolic diseases. What do you think that this kind of therapy could have an effect on for our health?
So I think really we're just kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg. So we can model some neurodegenerative diseases for therapeutics discovery. I think the power of being able to model comorbidities, because I think we're treating one disease when a patient has multiple, and I think we're treating them all separately. And I think the biggest advance in what our technology is able to offer is the ability to really model more than one at once. And I think that's going to be really like the main transformation. And I think if we're looking at in the future where you could take a fecal swab, you can culture to the actual microbiome of the patient, we can look more into the epigenomics or epigenetics. a patient and really kind of create a full model of multiple things happening at once. I think that's going to be the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a interesting and technically complicated therapy that you're talking about. I feel like genetics in general is this thing that, you talk about and it's this buzzword that people think that they understand, but they don't really understand. Honestly, even as somebody in medicine, I don't really feel like I understand it the way that I should. When we talk about the human genome being sequenced and all of these breakthroughs that have happened in like the past 30, 40 years, there was always like this promise, like, okay, now we're going to figure it out. And like, now all these things are going to change, but I don't really feel like that's trickled down. It's
really not. I'm quite frustrated, to be honest, because so when I started Cellmatics, that was in 2008. We did the first whole genome sequence of idiopathic infertile women, and we did it at Cornell, which at the time was the #1 center for IVF kind of in the world. And we identified so many biomarkers that could help really guide a woman through her fertility journey. We developed a test called the Fertilome test, and it was much more advanced than anything that's developed now. And I think we were like ahead of the market because doctors weren't using it. No one really understood what to make of it. It was really pioneering. 2008 is a long time ago. But I still think now, like when I'm talking to oncologists and I see like oncologists and major centers, the most that they're doing for patients is standard is like a 70 mutation panel for a cancer. And we know like there's so much more information beyond it. It's almost better not to do the 70 mutation if you're not doing, like, why get a little slice of the picture? And even when they do that, a lot of the times they're not making any decision based upon that.
Yeah,
it's just a little information, not enough to make a decision.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of waste. And I mean, I'm very happy actually to be in the UK because the UK invested a lot in Genomics England and in sequencing, whole genome sequencing patients with cancer. And so there's a huge data set. And then like we've actually gotten a lot of funding because they said we put a lot of money into sequencing patients, and now all the data is just sitting there. So now we need to fund people that could make that information actionable. And so we've got a lot of funding because of that. So it's been really helpful in it. But I think there is that major gap between information, and even the information that we have today. I think in 5 years from now, it'll be drastically different. Like we don't even know what to make of a lot of the non-coding regions and like how it influences.
Yeah. Or epigenetics, right? I feel like that's like a whole, like everybody's talking about it, but nobody really has any idea of what to do that with.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see the roadblocks just from like a provider perspective because, as somebody that's on like the front lines, I don't really want to do anything that hasn't been tried and tested, like, and has been grilled into me through the literature and like, as a standard course of treatment. But even so, like, I wonder, I wonder if there's some other social factors that you have insight into, being, because there is a disconnect between research and medicine, right? And so you see things differently than I see things. And so, I think the adoption of new technology, it's going to be difficult unless it's, very lucrative, to be quite honest with you. Like, when the new facial serum is coming out, like, if like, this like the vampire facial with like PRP or something like that, that's going to spread like wildfire, right? But a new cancer technology isn't necessarily going to, and I wonder, like, from your perspective, like, what are some of the roadblocks that you see? Because I see like, me being set in my ways as one, and the financial incentives as another, but you might see some other things.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I'd say I've had discussions with people from different walks of life, from different perspectives, and in terms of like policy, economics, medicine, the ethics of treating patients with something new. It's a really big conversation to have. We have a patient, let's say, imagine you're a patient and you have stage 4 cancer. You're going through therapies that are painful, that you're not responding to, and they're like, you almost don't want to get treated anymore. And then you do a test like ours. You pay for it out of pocket. It costs 15,000 US dollars. It includes the sequencing and the test itself. And you have a personalized recommendation. It's given you hope that, and your oncologist has recommended you to try us. And then the oncologist brings our report to the tumor board. Tumor board, and in some cases, tumor board accepts it. There is something in the UK, some medical centers have a genome board. And in our case, there's someone on the genome board who doesn't agree. It's like one single human is blocking this patient's access to trying this therapy that they could actually get from the pharmaceutical company via compassionate use, because pharmaceutical companies are reading our reports and they're actually buying into our rationale that you've modeled this, our therapy is helpful, and the patient isn't responding. So it's not an element of cost; it's an element of access, and it's in this point, it's really, I guess, an ethical question and a risk question, right? Yeah. It does medical center, but they can't do it unless it passes through the board. So this patient, he's actually a prominent media person. So he was like, I want to really make this public. Like, I want to kick up a fuss. Like, why is one person blocking me from being able to get a treatment that I'd sign any liability form for, but I want to get this treatment. And the patient actually, we were able to get the patient the treatment in Switzerland, in Germany, and America, but he can't get it in the UK, not at the center. So it's been like, we have all of these elements of like personal choice, personal freedom. It's combination of approved drugs. The drugs are approved. One is, I don't remember in this patient's case, in most cases, it's either like a cancer drug and an asthma medicine, or a cancer drug and it's like a psoriasis medicine. Like, it's not necessary. Some patients could be on these combinations by just having two diseases. One's an antihypertensive. So it seems like it's kind of crazy that you have these people that are like gatekeepers, and they want to tell someone who's going through something that they can't imagine that they can have something that could help them. And to do that, they'd have to travel. And patients with colorectal cancer, it's very hard to get on a plane. Like, they're not very mobile. It's very difficult. Yeah. So it's been difficult as the person offering the therapy, because we didn't imagine those difficulties of patients getting access, because then I feel bad, like someone pays for something that they can't get. And I've given them some glimmer of hope that they can have something that can help, but it's going to be difficult to get it. So we've been really trying to take a stand on this, and we're not very well funded, but if we were, I was going to film. We have a documentary filmmaker that we want to have come and interview patients, interview oncologists, interview tumor board members, and really create this social message and just bring awareness to this thing, like as new horizons and healthcare emerge, like, because it's not just our technology, right? It's others. So like, who determines who can access what?
Yeah, I had this conversation with another professor at the university that I teach at, and she's a professor of genetics. Because my background is in craniofacial genetics, and I look at it as like, these people have a genetic disease. We know the gene that causes it. We know the defective protein that causes it. Why are we not just fixing the gene? And her response to me was that, I guess that they had tried this in the past in kids, and there was, not great outcomes, resulted in a few patient deaths. And so now it was like this blowback in the opposite direction, like this hesitance to use the technology until it was, tried a million different times, or some sort of like, social pressures that would influence that. Have you, is that accurate, or have you heard about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it is like a liability position, but it's funny because I've just started talking with a number of doctors in America, and it's interesting because in America you have places like Sloan Kettering, which is a top center, but we've approached them. They've said, okay, when you have more data, we can offer it to patients. We're like, they're not going to start offering it now. Mount Sinai can offer it because it was developed at Mount Sinai and have a history with the technology. But I've started talking to a lot of private centers that are not necessarily affiliated with the top like known cancer centers, and they have no problem. Like, and a lot of patients are going this route. A lot of people like private pay, and some of the oncologists are saying they're just mapping pathways and saying, okay, this is your like a cancer mutation picture. Here's your, or as one oncologist that we work with, he says it's your constellation, which I love that. It's your personal constellation of mutations. And I'm going to hit this pathway with this drug, this pathway with this drug, this pathway with this drug. And so sometimes they're treating patients with 3 cancer drugs. Now, that's much more toxic, and potentially it hasn't been tested in an animal, right? They're just doing it in the air. And it makes logistical sense, but you haven't modeled it in an animal. We're modeling it in an animal, but the flies have always been used for toxicity screens because the flies are much more sensitive than us. So we've already tested the combination, and it's already approved drugs. It's not more than one cancer drug, yada, yada, yada. But it's what some people are able to do, but then we can be restricted it's kind of crazy. But I feel like in the US there is a lot more say, and if a patient wants something, there will be a road to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Europe, well, in the UK it's different.
Yeah. Do you think that's the climate of just biotech in general? I mean, it's so difficult as a small startup like yourself to really make these inroads. Like one of the things that you highlighted was like if you were better funded, like if you were a larger organization, do you feel like that the game is weighted against smaller startups like yourself?
I think we've probably taken on a very big problem. Like I think because we're not incrementally advancing, like in baby steps. We're kind of taking a big leap. And I think that's what it's going to take to really make a change. But it is hard for a small company to make that big change on its own. I think there are other companies who were kind of working towards the same. And I think it's like we're all part of the kind of the same team, like not in competition, but really trying to make a change together.
Yeah. I mean, because when I look at it, I look at like something like the COVID vaccine, right? It's not technically a genetic therapeutic, but it has some genetic basis to it because it's mRNA vaccine. And that's something that was, despite a lot of negative blowback, it got out, right? It got to the point. And cancer is huge.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there's other therapeutics, other therapeutic options other than this one thing, but we still don't have a cure for it. So
yeah, no, I'd say that in comparison, the COVID vaccine to our technology is relatively safe because it's just combinations of approved drugs that are kind of innocuous. We didn't have kind of like a pandemic to have the response to it, but yeah, I think it is. I mean, cancer is a pandemic. Cancer, it's increasing in young people. I can't tell you how many patients that we have now that are 20s, 30s, 40s with young children. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, I lost my mother. She was in her 70s. I can't imagine a child losing their mother in her 40s. Like, it's not fair. And if these people want a chance at doing something that can actually give them a chance at life, it's really hard. I get like, I'm like angry about it. It makes me really angry that these patients have a difficult time getting access.
So one of the things that you highlighted is just like the younger the demographic of patients that are coming in to see you and to seek out cancer help in general. Do you feel like there's any sort of trends that you can see with their types of cancer versus others? Like, is there more of a genetic component to it as opposed to like the lifestyle choices that we hear about with like smoking and things like that?
So I don't really see it from that perspective because we're just really looking at we look at the tumor and the blood, but I think it's more, I mean, when we're looking at colorectal cancer, it's just people are presenting with it earlier. And I mean, it's something that it just advances so quickly. So most of the patients don't know they have it until they're stage 3, stage 4, and then they come to us, and it's difficult. So traditionally, when I've only spoken about the personal discovery process that we have, which patient comes, we model the tumor in the fly, and then we do drug screening. So now we have a new technology we call 2Match, and 2Match matches a patient immediately, but from whole exome sequence or whole genome sequence immediately to a treatment recommendation based on all the historical drug screening that we've done. So, for example, there are about 450 unique kinds of colorectal cancer by mutation profile. And let's say 80% of the population will have one of 125 of these. So we've modeled all 125, and we've started screening all of those models so that an incoming patient will likely have a match, an immediate match. And that's really helpful because it does take a long time to build a fly model and do the screening. It could take 6 to 7 months. And a lot of patients were coming to us, so they don't have 6 to 7 months to wait for a recommendation. And so unfortunately, a lot of our initial patients passed away before we were able to get them a treatment. And we call them pioneer patients. So a lot of them knew that, but they wanted to do it anyway because they wanted to kind of pay it forward, and they wanted in the future to be able to get an immediate treatment.
Yeah. So my dad had anorectal melanoma. Are you familiar with that? Is that on your screen of all the different ones that you're looking at?
So I'd have to look at the mutation profile because usually melanoma we don't really, but rectal cancer we do.
Yeah. So anorectal melanoma, it's a melanoma of a non-skin exposed area, right? So it's actually in the GI tract. And universally fatal, right? Like when, he didn't realize the diagnosis when he got it. He was like, oh, okay, it's like a rectal cancer. I'm going to go through this path. But as soon as like I got the diagnosis, I was just like my jaw was on the floor. But he knew, I had told him or not me, I think that the surgeon had told him the overwhelming likelihood of mortality. And he still went through every single thing because he thought to himself the same way that you're talking about, is that he's going to pay it forward. Maybe like some other person could get this. So he tried a few different clinical trials, none of which worked, and eventually succumbed to the disease. And I think that it's interesting to see it from that lens, is that there are these people that will basically volunteer themselves for unknown treatments, and some of these treatments were very difficult. Like, are you familiar with interferon therapy at all?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if your mom had it during her cancer experience, but interferon therapy was like, he was a different person, like you could talk to him and he wouldn't remember what you were saying. And, his personality changed. And it was like a year that he was on this therapy. It did nothing for him, and he was only doing it because he thought that there would be some sort of data that would be given to it, to future generations,
That's really incredible. Like, that's really admirable.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. But my point is that that's just like an interesting thing. Like, I feel like, there's lots of people out there that would go through whatever therapy is available to them, because especially when you have overwhelming likelihood of mortality, right? Like you only have like a certain amount of time left. There's a certain amount of the population that's just like, okay, I'm not going to do anything. Because that was my mom. My mom, she got to the point where it was overwhelming likelihood of mortality. She's like, you know what, I'm done. I'm just going to enjoy my life. And, we're going to just, ride it out. My dad was like, I'll do whatever, we'll try whatever we can. He always had that. And I feel like that there is a certain subsection of the population. I don't know if that's something that, you can tap into, but there are patients out there, I think, that would be volunteering themselves, because it's a disease that cuts through every socioeconomic status, every demographic. So have you seen patients like that? Have you had any experience with patients like that?
Yeah, so I'd say most of our patients are exactly that patient. So their funding, I mean, it's $15,000. So one, it's patients that have the means. I'll just mention, we've created a foundation called the My Personal Therapeutics Foundation, and we raise funds to support patients who could benefit from personalized therapy, which really everyone can. And who can't afford it. And so we've actually supported a few patients through this journey. And we continue to raise funds to support new patients. But the patients that can afford it, they're funding their own journey when they know that, you know, their time is really limited and it's going to take time for us to get them a treatment. And I'd say our patients are really nice, because if we have a patient that's really needing the therapy, we'll put them ahead. There's only so much screening we can do at a time. So we have basically a line of fruit flies that need therapeutic screening, and we can screen maybe 3 or 4 at a time. And so we screen it usually goes in order of who pays, but then it goes in order of need. So if a patient's in remission or they've just started a new therapy and they've got 6 months until they're going to start something new, we kind of play with the line, and we have to let patients know, because patients are like, wait, I was expecting a result this month. And we have to say, just so you know, there's a patient who really needs something. And they all care about each other's position. You know, they're like, oh, of course, screen that person first. I'm good, you know, and we've had this with all of the patients. And even the families, when a patient passes, a lot of the families, they still want to know the results, and they either want to know that it's published or that it's shared, that it's entered our data set and it's going to help a new patient. And we try to keep this community alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how that mortality just kind of changes the way that people interact with each other. You know, people become very gracious, and you know, it's just interesting. I did want to talk with you, you know, just for the last few minutes about the timeline. So let's say somebody comes in to you and, you know, wants your treatment. Like, how long does it take for them to actually get those recommendations?
So in the beginning, it was 6 to 7 months. And now for colorectal cancer, we have 2 match. So 2 matches is available for colorectal cancer and some pancreatic cancer and some gastric cancer, but mainly colorectal. And so as soon as we get a patient, if the patient has had sequencing before, if they've had a Caris or a Foundation One or a Tempus, we could sometimes use that. But we're developing 2 match as a software, as a medical device, and we're going through the FDA and European regulatory agencies. And so for it to be designated as a medical device, the input would be whole exome sequencing with a certain like specification. So not like the Tempus and the Caris, but if a patient has that now, we don't want to have them incur additional time. So we're not going to take a sample and send it for additional sequencing unless we don't see anything of interest in the Tempus or Caris report. So some patients, they say, you know what, I've done the Tempus or the Caris, I still want the whole exome sequence and I have time, so I'm going to do that. But it's really a month for the sequencing, and then we get an immediate recommendation. And that's what we're going to for all the cancers. So at first, it's difficult for us because we are a small company, and patients come to us with different cancer types, and we were taking them all. But it kind of is at the detriment of ourselves, because for us, we're building 2 match, and we want to screen all of these 2 match avatars that we built. And patients have more complex tumors, where the avatars that we need to screen for 2 match are more what we call building block avatars. So it's like 1 mutation and then 1 + 1 mutation, 1 + 3 mutations. So to build out so that AI and machine learning like to have a data set like not kind of 40 unique profiles that aren't related. And so we're really trying to focus now on, we just got a large European grant. We've got a 2.5 million euro grant from the European Innovation Council to fund the development of 2 match. So we're trying to take a little step away from patient screening. So we'll screen patients if they're colorectal or pancreatic, but we're trying to stay away from other things just for now. Once we have like enough interest, and we also work with biopharma, so we screen investigational drugs. We can help biopharma understand how their drug works in patients with different molecular profiles, and also identify combination partners for their drugs. And so we're really trying to move towards kind of that element now. And once we have enough contracts, then we'll build a bigger facility, and then we can service more patients.
How much is the actual genome sequencing part take? Like, I think that
it takes about a month.
Mm. Hmm.
So it
Interesting.
depends. So we send the sequence. We don't do that internally. We could work with sequencing partners. So
Mm.
in the US, we were working with Somagen. In Europe and the rest of the world, we're working we're working with Macrogen in South
Yeah.
Korea.
No, it's still like I'm still of the age where I can remember that the human genome being sequenced at all was like a 10-year thing, right?
Yeah.
Everybody was like, jumping up and down like as if like we had landed on the moon or something like that. And now it's just available to us in a month, which is pretty
Yeah.
interesting. The
Yeah, the
lot.
cost is going down too. The cost is like since we did the first whole genome sequencing years ago, the cost has kind of really gone down. And soon it'll be much cheaper and faster. What takes a bit longer and costs a bit more is that we do this tumor sequencing at a very deep depth because we want to resolve all of the subclones. We want to understand what's going on because you could imagine as over the 6 months it would take us to identify a therapy, the patient's tumor could evolve. And what we found is that the kind of the mutations that are there that are present in the beginning, if you have a deep enough view, you'll see all of them, and the same picture will still it'll still be the same in the clonal evolution. Just one might be stronger than another, but it'll still be the same kind of bad guys. So it becomes easy to understand when you're doing a very deep read.
Have you had your genome sequenced?
No, I haven't. I've done 23andMe.
Yeah, yeah. And do you have like a special insight into your own genome from the 23andMe that,
Yeah.
someone like yourself would not have based on your experience?
Yeah, so I have a really good understanding. I actually don't have a lot of mutations that are kind of indicative of like future disease, but one is kind of macular degeneration and probably and like other issues that are eye related.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm still a little hesitant. Not because I feel like like the biggest thing when I talk to people is like they worry about the privacy issue, like their genetic information being out there. But for me, like I just like I don't really want to know, like I
Yeah.
just want to live life, you know.
Yeah, I was scared. Actually, we did when I started Cellmatics, we were developing the fertilome test. We kind of did the 23andMe as kind of like market research, and we wanted to see how a patient feels and kind of go through that journey.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it was really informative. I don't really care about the privacy component. I'm not. I'd be more worried if people know how broke I am and have my financial information.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I want to ask you just like as a side topic about the fertilome test, just because I feel like that's something that is, people in my family members are like they're trying that whole experience of trying to get pregnant past the age of normalcy. Is that like how was that more effective in getting outcomes of pregnancy? The when you test somebody genetically, is that something that's still out there? Is it therapeutic? Because it's not something that I've heard about until you
so
said it.
no, so it wasn't a commercial success and it was scrapped kind of. Unfortunately, there are tests today that are available and I can send you some. I wouldn't endorse any
Mhm.
um, like publicly, but there are tests that you can take. I think ours was a bit more of really understanding a woman's egg quality and kind of potential and guiding them through whether they would be successful with their own egg or if
Mhm.
they should try an egg donor or if IVF wouldn't work for them at all. So it was more kind of indicative of those things. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting, like how that whole part of our society is going to play out. I think that women in general are having kids later, and some are choosing not to have children, and people are talking about all the population changes. So that I've never really thought about the genetic component as being a factor until you said it. So it was interesting to hear about that. But we are getting to the end of our time. Laura, thank you so much for being with us. At the end of every session, I do have my 3 questions that I ask all of my guests. So if you don't mind indulging me, the biggest thing that I want to know is, where do you see genetics in 10 years? Where do you hope that it's going to be? And where do you realistically think that it's going to be? Like, do you think that a lot of these promises that we're talking about are going to materialize over the next decade, or even, 20 years from now? Do you feel like, based on all of your understanding, that might have to be tailored a little bit?
I'm very ambitious about our genetic future. And I mean, I think Viven, my whole kind of purpose of being and my purpose of life is really transforming the way we look at genetic disease and personalizing medicine. So I'm very optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Another question I ask my guests is, if you were to talk to somebody on the street, what is something in your field that you wish that everybody knew, that everybody that was from, the person that is, taking your order at a restaurant to, the highest people in office? What would you say is something that you wish that everybody knew about, let's say genetics in general?
I wish everyone, I'll focus on more on cancer. I just wish that everyone understood how every cancer is different. When you say, let's say colorectal cancer, like if I had colorectal cancer and the person next to me had colorectal cancer, we have very different diseases and we should be treated differently. And I think even a lot of doctors don't understand that, and don't, maybe they do understand it, but they're limited in what they're able to offer. So I think that's really important, because I think just changing that mindset will change a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting to know. Last one. A lot of my interests of doing this podcast and being versed on cutting edge technology in general comes from my interest in science fiction. It's something that's been a source of inspiration for me. I can look at some of the conversations that I've had, and there are books that are particularly significant. A lot of the stuff that we had talked about, when you were talking about the whole privacy issue, I was thinking of the movie Gattaca, which I know is something that I'm sure you've heard about, considering your field. What are some sources of inspiration, whether it's, pop culture like movies and books, or even, other things that are a little bit more obscure that you draw inspiration that has brought you to this field?
So I don't look at it quite like that. I mean, I'm not so into science fiction. I'm really into space. So you can see I've got this whole floor of my house is devoted to like the moon theme. Cool. Really like kind of stargazing and looking to like the beyond, in a real like literal way, not so much in like a sci-fi way. Mm-hmm. Also just art in general. And like artistry is kind of an inspiration for me.
That's cool. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you to everybody who's listening out there. We will see you again in the future. Have a great day, everybody. No problem.
We appreciate you taking part in today's episode. Take this chance to reimagine a better future by joining a community of futurists who strive for a remarkable world. Be a part of this growing network and contribute to making the world a more positive place. Visit thefuturistsociety.net and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a drop of hopeful futurism.